Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Fun Police podcast with Josh Grote and Devon Payne. Joining us today, once again, is Nick Bazarek. And today, we're going to talk about the DC movie universe, or the lack thereof one, why DC movies are so bad, and what they might be able to do to get better, or if they were good at all to begin with.
To start off this little retrospective on the DC universe as a whole, we turn to the most recent DC movie released in theaters, that is The Joker. Now, neither Josh nor myself have actually seen the film, but we have Nick Bazarek here with us who has seen it. Nick, what are your thoughts on The Joker?
I think it's the only good DC movie past Heath Ledger's death. I will say it is, it's not a happy movie. It's not a fast-paced movie. It's a particularly well-directed and scored movie. The lead does an amazing job. I like the plot line where they go with it. They don't take it into a political place. As we know, the Joker is not a political figure. It's more just he just prefers chaos. And I really like what they did with it artistically, and the script, everything about it. I thought it was a great movie.
Do you think that the success of this movie that is so well directed, so well scored, so artistic in expression, do you think that this film could signal a sort of renaissance, or at least give hope to DC fans that, hey, we can do something with this?
Oh, I think it better. I think this might be the last chance for people who like DC and like the comics and like their plot lines. They want to see them come alive in the big screen, and if they don't follow up with the Joker in a big way, then they might not get another chance, because their following won't return after one or two more crap movies like Spider-Man v Superman.
Or you mean Superman versus Batman, right?
That is 100% what I meant.
Okay.
I'm not tired at all. Spider-Man versus Superman, by the way, the crossover you never knew you wanted.
Oh, man. Never knew I wanted
boy.
that one. Yeah, I think I would have... I think I'd agree with Nick here. I'm surprised Joker in general would even be able to bring DC back from the brink. But there was a lot of media attention that I would really rather just stay out of, because the media circus around Joker was a mess, to say the least. But there was a lot of media circus around it, and I think the film did really well, especially given this media circus. So we'll leave that where that is, but yeah, it looked like a good movie from the outside looking in. So I'm glad to hear that it was well reviewed by somebody who would say that they like a good movie.
Don't we all?
All right. With the Joker's success, we turn now to the first film that started this whole DC movie year's debacle, Man of Steel, released initially in 2013. The last Superman movie released before this was Superman Returns, which had Kevin Spacey as Lex Luthor in a plot that didn't make any sense. So
instead of doing the good, the bad, and the ugly here, we're just going from the good straight to the ugly, right? That's what we're trying to go for.
I don't know.
That's all that's available.
I don't know. I think Man of Steel as its own movie wasn't that bad. Like, I thought it was directed, there wasn't any noticeably corny dialogue, per se. The plot made sense, and it certainly set the tone for the rest of the DC universe, for better or for worse.
I agree with you. I think in its own standalone film, again, I'm not someone who's particularly into the lore. I had no complaints with the movie. It was a fine movie, as movies go. The problem was when they kind of started wringing out the storyline they had and had to start writing up new stuff that they didn't quite follow the source material for very well, and created bad movies with bad CGI and bad plots. And that's where it goes into murky territory for me.
Josh, any thoughts on Man of Steel?
I pretty well agree with Nick there. I remember Man of Steel being... I remember, like, the hype around Man of Steel was, like, this weird combination of... It was good? It was like this, like, really questioning good. Like, that's everything I ever heard from anybody that watched it. It was like, it was good, but it felt like every time somebody said that, they were missing something from it. I don't remember what it was. I think people might have been trying to speak the good of it into existence more than it actually being good.
So, it wasn't ostensibly a bad movie, unlike Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, released in 2016.
what Nick tried to turn into the ultimate crossover of the century here.
I do try. Sometimes they get me.
Speaking of additions, one of my main complaints of Batman vs. Superman was the addition of Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is one of the big three of the Justice League, so I guess it makes sense that she makes an appearance at some point, but...
And the Wonder Woman movie hadn't released at this point yet, had it?
No, Wonder Woman follows this, which I think is a mixed order of things, because Wonder Woman just, before she enters the battle in the final sequence against Doomsday, we see her, I believe, talking with Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne tries to blackmail her with a black and white photo of some pilot from World War I. We don't know who this is. I assume this is elaborated in Wonder Woman. But we don't know who this is. We don't know what significance this blackmailing has for Wonder Woman. And eventually, when she just appears on the battlefield in all of her glory in the fight against Doomsday, it's just kind of like, wait, why is she here? Because it didn't feel like she had much of a reason to be in the film altogether.
Have you seen Wonder Woman?
No, I have not.
Yeah, I completely agree with the fact that people, the audience when watching it has no idea this should be in a big emotional reveal, but they didn't build up the universe before it. And I think that's the biggest problem with this, is you feel like they try to squeeze so much into so little time and kind of milk everything out of it. They were like, we have to put this cameo in here so we can get a Wonder Woman movie out of it. We have to try to get this whole fight scene and like all the prerequisites to it and everything that happens. And it just kind of feels like there are holes everywhere in the plot and in the dialogue and in the action.
Yeah, we've barely gotten into this so far, and I'm already thinking, man, they really sold the farm to buy the cattle here. they Batman vs. Superman, in my opinion, should have been the penultimate or the final movie of of this whole DC universe thing. This should have been the end game or the Civil War comparison. Yeah, definitely. It should have been that comparison point. You have Doomsday of all characters showing up, and Doomsday is you mentioned Doomsday.
Yeah, Doomsday.
Yeah.
In this film, Doomsday is brought about through the half-assed resurrection of General Zod, who died in Man of Steel.
Right. So you have Doomsday showing up, and Doomsday is supposed to be one of the ultimate bad guys from the Superman universe.
Yes.
Because Batman is overpowered to hell and back, in my opinion.
Batman is.
Oh, Batman. Superman, excuse me.
Thank you.
Here we go. Okay. So it doesn't make much sense to me to do Batman versus Superman when they did it, because you're introducing Wonder Woman, you have this element, nobody knows what this is. You're really just trying to pile all this stuff into one movie, and you're trying to make your own. You're trying to force the DC the DC movie universe into existence when it hasn't been naturally made yet. This is a big comparison here for me between DC and Marvel, as far as I can see. Marvel made this universe because they made a bunch of individual superhero movies and they tied them all together. DC tried to make their universe by making maybe just one individual superhero movie and then immediately just ramming them all together. Mm-hmm. And it's you're going about this in the wrong way. We had three Iron Man movies. Technically, we had a bunch of Hulk movies too. We had a couple of Captain America movies before the Avengers came around. These movies existed, there was some basis for the universe before the universe was created. DC, they went about this in the wrong way.
They certainly mishandled it. Wonder Woman definitely should have been released before they even tried Batman vs. Superman, and I dare say that they should have had a Batman standalone film beforehand as well.
I would say that not doing a Batman standalone film beforehand is just burning money, but also...
my thought on this is, let's take making whiskey. It seems like it's off on tangent, but I promise it's going to come together. So when you're making whiskey, you have the distillate, you distill it, and technically for something to be considered whiskey, it has to be aged in a barrel. And now, some places, technically you can just throw it in a barrel, shake it around for a minute, and then dump it out. but it hasn't developed the nice taste. It hasn't developed those tanniny flavors in the whiskey. It takes years in a barrel to do this. So some people, some places, they can just ship product out. They do as fast as possible. You throw it into a barrel for 20 minutes, 1 year, and then they just dump it on shelves just to get as much money as possible. What that does is that leaves the consumer wanting the subtle notes, the flavor, all the smells, the barrel spice. It's just not there. And when you have a movie universe that you haven't set up for all these things to age and develop, you have these big reveals like him, Batman, or not Batman at this point, but him showing her the picture of the person who she loved. It should be this big moment, and it should be an emotional moment, and you should realize what weight that has in the character, but nothing is there. It's just underdeveloped.
So the fact that this picture was shown before Wonder Woman had even released essentially removes what should be an emotional moment from the film.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if DC going into this was already, in a mentality of we're behind. We're losing money here, because it feels all so rushed, and it's almost like does DC control their own fate, or is DC owned by someone?
I believe DC is owned by Warner Brothers.
So Warner Brothers in this case, I wonder if Warner Brothers almost said like, hey, if these movies do well, we'll build you a universe, but you have to set the groundwork for us to build a universe. I almost wonder if Warner Brothers here was trying to push some quota on them, because that's the only reason I could see that would make sense why a Batman movie wasn't made before Batman vs Superman, and why a Wonder Woman movie wasn't made before BVS. Because even disregarding the whole, we need a woman superhero movie, disregarding the media circus, it would have been a good movie to have to lead up to BVS.
It would have established Wonder Woman as a character, so that way you didn't have to delve into the comics. You could have just watched Wonder Woman and then essentially have been ready for BVS.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if it doesn't matter, like, who the character is, if the character is integral to the story that you're trying to create, you should have background already established for them. And Marvel did that fantastically through their movies.
All right, moving on from Batman vs. Superman, we've already touched on Wonder Woman as it is. Justice League 2017, released shortly after Wonder Woman. What do we think about the Justice League?
Can we just not?
Can we just not?
That's with Henry Cavill, whatever Superman's name is. That's with his his CGI'd out mustache, right?
No, yeah. Talk about rushing.
Just let Superman have a mustache, please? Come
Mustache
on.
Superman.
Oh, it's hilarious. God, what film? He was in Mission Impossible. That's where he had the mustache on. So that's why he had it during the filming of that.
It was some spy movie. It wasn't A Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah,
I saw that, and he didn't have the mustache then.
It was one where he's in the bathroom scene, and you can see the squishy floor. Like, they had a fight. I'm pretty sure it's the most recent Mission Impossible. They had a fight in the bathroom, and the way they do these stunts in Hollywood is they have squishy floors, like with spongy floors, and then they CG them to looking hard mats later, or they change it so it looks like they're not taking falls on floors that are made of rubber. But in the final cut of the film, you can see people denting the floor like 4 inches with their knees when standing up.
Nice.
Which is great.
So, stepping away from Mission Impossible's pitfalls,
my bad.
Justice League. Again, with a plot that seems very, very rushed, very
The universe is gonna
rehashed, per
die.
se.
I think at this point into the films, I just kind of stopped paying attention to anything that happened about them, because it's like these have all been disappointments. This is just sad. I don't want to listen to any more like bad news about DC movies, because this is like, I'm a fan of serious stuff. I'm a serious person. I don't mind the serious subject matter in the DC movies, but just the way that they're doing it makes it terrible, because there's a way to do serious and there's a way not to, and that's a lot of what DC had been doing. So I don't have much input on Justice League specifically, because I didn't much pay attention to anything about it, because I already knew it was gonna be half bad.
My biggest problem is that DC realizes that they don't have much going for them in the way of the universe, in the way of the subtlety. So what they do is every plot and trying to get people interested is the universe is going to die. Look how bad this is for the universe. The world is going to die. Not just a small, it can't just be someone fighting this one thing, or Batman fighting Joker in this one area. It's not the universe. It's just him in his isolated city. It's not blown out of proportion.
It's not some character-specific plot. It's not some conflict
Yes.
between two characters. It's some...
It's not even Loki bringing in an invasion force
no,
on New
it's
York.
not an Avengers level threat, to put Mysterio here.
To quote Spider-Man,
It's not an Avenger. They keep bringing in these world-ending threats when ideally they should have these smaller threats so as to establish the characters. That way they're more fleshed out when a more...
And it feels real.
Yes, so that way it feels real. So that way when you have Steppenwolf and the Parademons running after the mother boxes, which were still never explained.
Yeah.
So when you have Steppenwolf coming after the mother boxes, it seems very ad hoc. There was no real build up to it. It's just like, hey,
It
this
just
guy-
happened.
Yeah, it just happened. It's just like, hey, this guy's here. These objects have been on Earth for some thousands of years, but we only now just know about it.
It's like if Thanos just randomly showed up and was like, hey, the Power Stone's been buried here underneath the Washington Monument for 3 years. Bam, it's in the glove. Bam, you're all dead. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so after Justice League, we have Aquaman and Shazam coming out. Aquaman first as a film.
Can I go?
Yes.
Why? There was a point in the theater where, multiple points in the theater, I was seeing with friends, female friend of mine, and I looked at her in the middle of like one of the important, I don't know if you've seen it, but they're on like wreckage, or they're sitting on some float in the ocean. It's supposed to be this important build up, like an I love you moment, and I just turned to her and mouthed to her the entire script for like 2 sentences, because you could just guess it. The writing in this movie was so bad it hurt me.
You know, I watched Aquaman with our other roommate, Chris, because I don't know why he put it on. I don't know. I don't know.
I'm not sure why that was on either. He must have been bored. Anyway,
He must have been
continue.
bored, but
Watch it
regardless,
more.
that's the only way that I watched Aquaman. And I thought Aquaman I feel like Aquaman in some ways they learned a little bit from Marvel, but they were trying to copy Marvel in some ways. Like the movie was a little bit more comedic, which, plays off of Jason Momoa's strengths, because Jason Momoa is a strong actor. He's good at what he does, especially when he's given a good script. But a lot of sections of the movie were just like, please stop. This is unnecessary.
Visceral.
This is it's like I'm like, please jab my ears out with a screwdriver, because you're giving this man just terrible dialogue in some regards. The fight scenes were pretty well orchestrated. I liked the implementation of Black Manta. Overall, the idea of the plot was not horrible.
No.
It was just some of the execution in some places. The movie looked amazing.
Yeah.
Oh yes, the
CGI.
artistic direction, top notch.
They fixed that up for sure.
But that couldn't have necessarily saved them from the lackluster execution they had with this great idea. It just kind of fell flat as a result. Because you have Jason Momoa, a phenomenal actor. I would dare say he was one of the brighter spots of Justice League. And then he
Not
he
so
just
much.
Yeah, it's not saying
not so much in his own film, oddly enough.
At least it's
Along
that
with-
robot boy, badly CGI'd.
Oh, Cyborg.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, going back to Justice League for a moment, for just a brief aside. You know what would have made Justice League an infinitely better movie?
If they killed it.
Martian Manhunter. Just hear me out here. Martian Manhunt. Okay, I'm kidding. But
All right.
so Shazam.
Shazam, another movie that I have not seen.
Have you seen Shazam?
The only one I have not, which is a shame because I've heard it's actually decent, but
Yeah.
college student.
What limited things I've heard about Shazam have been pretty good. I hear it's a lot more of a comedic movie, which I guess makes sense when you're talking about Shazam as a character. I mean, Shazam is a teenage kid
Yes,
with superpowers.
he's a kid that gets the superpowers that essentially turn him into Superman, but not quite. He gets his powers based from magic as opposed to some bullshit Kryptonian biology.
Yeah. So, moving on quick from Shazam, then that brings us back to Joker. I'm pretty sure in the chronology. So we've seen So I think we finish up that section pretty quick there, but we've definitely seen improvement from the DC films. As hard as it is to call Aquaman a good film in comparison to something for some people, it's definitely good in comparison to BVS and Justice League.
It's a watchable film. Again, some of the writing, my favorite movies have just horrible writing in some sections. And it could have been worse. It had some poor writing, but the plot itself was not horrible. I didn't completely hate the ending. The art direction was amazing. I thought the performances are not amazing, but they were good. It was a fine movie.
Well, we'll move on now to the holy grail of DC movies.
The Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy, starting with Batman
Soundboard.
Begins.
Soundboard class.
This film sees the introduction of Christian Bale as Batman fighting against the evils of Scarecrow. And that's all I can really remember about that movie. Batman Begins was the weakest of those three films, though it did give plenty of ground to build upon for the next movies, though. It created a well-established universe, a well-established Batman, and gave him a supervillain fighting background with Scarecrow already being done and dusted with.
This is almost one of the things that I look at with the casting of like Ben Affleck as Batman for BVS and for Justice League.
Can you imagine if we had the Christian Bale Batman fighting against Steppenwolf?
I don't know if Christian Bale on his own could have saved it. But you want to look at like believability in films, because the point of films is that you're supposed to be able to suspend your belief and put yourself, I'm watching this actually happen. This is something that could actually happen. With Christian Bale, that man is one of the most dedicated to his craft actors I've ever seen. He nails the Batman role perfectly. He looks legit. The man is shredded every time he's on screen. He's just an amazing actor for Batman. And then you have Ben Affleck, who's in rom-coms, and it's like, I don't think this is the right casting decision.
Maybe they should have learned from Marvel's lesson when they tried to cast Ben Affleck as Daredevil.
Perhaps.
Anyway, so Christian Bale makes Batman believable, is what you're saying, essentially. So we have a believable Batman established with Christian Bale. We have him in this set universe. And then we have The Dark Knight, which introduces Heath Ledger's Joker, often hailed as one of the best Joker performances ever.
Well, yes, it does. And not only does he do a great job portraying the Joker, and I think we all agree that his Joker is, I think, the best Joker out of all of the ones done, even though Joaquin Phoenix's Joker he did a great job acting, but at the same time, I don't know, Heath's performance was just legendary, and it's more of a full character because you get to see him in more than just his house.
It's a different kind of character. The Joker's changed since then. Joker, every time it's been portrayed, it's been a different portrayal of the Joker. It's always been this really actor-centric thing, and Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker, in my opinion, is it's the best because it gets that chaotic nature of the Joker down just right. It's not too way out of whack, but it's just enough out of whack that it's like, okay, yeah, no, I can see this guy being mentally unhinged, but still having some sense of what he's doing.
Yeah, you can see that he's unpredictable, but he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and that's my favorite part about it, is the writing and the plot for it, is they don't just care about developing Batman, and then Joker's over here, he's behind something, and he'll appear half across the country later doing God knows what. It shows the development of his plan and how smart he is and how he thinks ahead of everyone in development of the character of the Joker. So it develops both sides of the movie, and I think that's what makes it a great movie, and it carries the Joker on into the universe.
There's also the plot with Harvey Dent, who later becomes Two-Face, that's also integral to things. Harvey Dent was established in Batman Begins, and we see him go from... One of the characters calls Harvey Dent the White Knight of Gotham. We see Harvey Dent go from this White Knight dedicated to fighting crime, becomes so swallowed in what he's doing that he essentially falls from grace and also gets his face burned by oil.
Speaking of, that's one of, like, for the age of the film, that's one of the best CGI jobs I've seen in a film, like, ever, to be honest. Just, it looks believable. Like, I've only taken one anatomy class. You're, like, a bio major. Like, it looks believable.
Well, and for that, it was one of the first CGIs to retract. So generally what you do, especially if in makeup and a lot of CGI, you're adding components on top of other layers. It was one of the first films to do a very high detailed rendering of the inside anatomy of a body. You can see through the muscle on his face, and you can see his jawbone. It is amazing. Yeah.
Because there's less organic matter there. They have to
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of trickery to get into that, and it's so
Very
well
well
done.
done.
Well, yeah, and every single everything has to be modeled. All the muscles have to be modeled. Everything has to be modeled independently. And they developed a way to 3D track his face. So we had markers on his face, and they had extra cameras in the room that solely focused on those markers instead of getting the shot. And they developed the technology for it, and it turned out amazing.
And with that retraction, we can see Two-Face's character really become Two-Face instead of just Harvey Dent. Because Harvey Dent essentially dies in the building explosion during that movie, and from that, Two-Face rises with half of his face burnt off, and really becomes a very damaged character. He becomes the villain that the Joker intended him to become. As I believe Batman puts it in the movie, the Joker wanted the best of us being Commissioner Gordon, Batman, and Harvey Dent. He wanted the best. So he took Harvey Dent and he made him into Two-Face. So ultimately, the Joker succeeded with his plot despite being caught by Batman in the end. But having Two-Face there as the ultimate trump card, more or less, to go after Commissioner Gordon and threaten him and potentially remove him if Batman had not acted the way that he did, really, honestly, I think the trilogy could have ended there, but we have The Dark Knight Rises that follows this set during an 8-year gap between when Batman supposedly disappears shortly after The Dark Knight and when he reappears when Bane and his gaggle of thieves threatens Gotham and, I believe, much of the world. It's not an Avengers-level threat in The Dark Knight Rises, but there is definitely some global implications.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that DC, with this own trilogy on its own, showed progression in like a similar way to the way that Marvel showed progression. But then in their attempts to create their own universe, they can't show a similar level of progression. You go from, your threat levels slowly increase through these films, and it's just amazing that they had these ideas down pat in earlier films, but they just didn't bring them forward.
I honestly think that they could have used this trilogy. They could have used this trilogy as the basis for the DC movie universe and had Man of Steel set after the events of The Dark Knight Rises.
That's honestly what I thought they were originally going to do, but then they didn't.
We've all been debated. Every one of us.
And then instead we get this new Batfleck. He's there during the battle in Metropolis against General Zod. He's trying to help people, and he sees Superman with collateral damage, and it's very mishandled. It's a stark departure from the Batman that has been established over the course of years by this point.
And my biggest problem with Ben Affleck in this role is just his lack of emotion when he's, even the emotional scenes, his face has one look, and it works in the rom-coms, and it works in, like, The Accountant, because he's on the spectrum of the accountant, and he's not supposed to be able to, have emotions. But you don't take him as seriously. It kind of takes you, like, again, that suspension of disbelief. It takes you out of it. And it's just, I don't know, it ruins it for me.
So basically, they took something really good and they ruined it going forward. But I believe that wraps up our discussion on the Batman trilogy. So we're gonna end up getting a little bit even earlier here and talk more about the DC animated series, where they really dominated. They really dominated the animated series through the through the early and mid 2000s. Marvel just didn't have a foothold there whatsoever. But Marvel was also in a really weird period of flux in that time, so it makes more sense.
Marvel's intellectual property and characters were split between a lot of different studios. DC didn't suffer from that problem ostensibly because they had almost all of it tucked under Warner Brothers, and if it wasn't back then, it certainly is now. The first of these animated series was the Batman animated series, which took what was ostensibly just a comic book character and put it into animation that, for its time, was groundbreaking. It's in this series that we see Kevin Conroy established as Batman and Bruce Wayne. We see Mark Hamill established as the ultimate Joker voice actor. And we see them reprise these roles based on their performance in Batman the Animated Series. we see them return to these roles alongside other recurring characters in the new Batman adventures that succeeded the Superman animated series. And the Superman animated series had Bruce Timm. Bruce Timm was the director of animation for Superman the animated series, and the iconic designs that we see in the original Batman animated series were altered dramatically going into the new Batman adventures. So we see some redesigns that aren't exactly memorable. The Joker, for example, goes from these stark yellow eyes, green tinted black hair, and the red lips. In the new Batman adventures, the red lips are gone. Instead of yellowed eyes, he has these weird, primarily black eyes. It's like he's wearing some odd kind of contacts.
Just for reference, how new is the new Batman Adventures compared to the original Batman animated series?
I think the original animated series started early 90s, and then we have the new Superman and Batman adventures in like late 90s. So there's a few years of difference between them.
Okay. So it's just progression of the animated series. But skimming over them in a little bit less detail. As a kid, I remember watching the stuff that at least would have been on TV. I don't remember specifically what series it was at the time, but they were just really honestly amazing animated series. I vividly remember thoroughly enjoying oh god, I don't even remember the name of it. It was a Batman series with a different Batman character.
Oh, Batman Beyond.
Yes, Batman Beyond.
Batman Beyond takes place like 50 years after the new Batman adventures and features Terry McGinnis as the new Batman with a new suit, new gadgets, all that stuff, alongside a older Bruce Wayne that kind of serves as an operator operating behind the scenes in the Batcave. What's really interesting about Batman Beyond for me is that we see a new Batman. With Bruce Wayne, Batman is a serious, no-nonsense type of character, as he is in the comics. With Batman Beyond, though, we have Terry McGinnis as a much more quippy and comedic Batman, while still also maintaining that good old-fashioned Batman edge.
So definitely something that I think the movies could have learned from there. Even though I think with television series and animated series, it's a little bit harder to translate those over into films and to translate elements from them into films. It's definitely these are definitely like high points though in the early anything cinematic being released from DC, just because they're weekly recurring series. They were always, maybe it's the rose tinted, the rosy glasses, but they were always putting out good content. I don't know. It just seemed a little bit. It's a different way of consuming media, and it performs a different service than a movie. But these were, if these animated series were indicative of quality, then you would have thought that movies at the time directed by similar groups with inspiration from these would have actually carried similar weight. So we've been touching on the competition a little bit as we've gone through here, making some allusions to Marvel, making some comparisons. So just as a quick run-through reference of where Marvel was at, for the early days, Marvel's only saving grace was ever Spider-Man. Sony specifically bought Spider-Man from Marvel because they believed it was the only thing that would have made them money. I think the offer was wasn't it like $15 billion for all of the Marvel properties for Sony, and then they were like, no, Spider-Man's the only one that's going to make us money. We'll give you $10 billion for Spider-Man alone. They paid a ton of money for Spider-Man, and they made decent money with Spider-Man. The original Spider-Man animated series they released after purchasing the license was good. The 3 movies they made, in my opinion, are high points of my childhood, are fantastic movies, and I will fight people that Spider-Man 3 is a better movie than people make it out to be. It was a mess, but it's still a better movie than people make it out to be.
It was a beautiful mess.
I second that. That was my entire childhood as well. Again, maybe some rose-colored glasses, but the amount of times I had to watch those movies on, because that's the only thing we had in the house, the one thing we had for the DVD player.
To, I guess, continue to toot the horn of the Spider-Man films, they they really established what a superhero movie could be by establishing this continuous universe, because with the Batman movies that had preceded it, we had 3 different Batmen, we had 3 different main overarching villains. There was no really contiguous universe. These 3 different Spider-Man films had the same Spider-Man. We saw Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker progress through these different films, fighting these different villains.
And we even saw recurring villains in the sense of the Osborn. The acting also was just fantastic for it. I still, every time I see Willem Dafoe, I'm still like, that's Green Goblin.
Yep.
Stop that. That's Green
That's
Goblin.
Green Goblin.
You can't tell me otherwise.
Even after Green Goblin is defeated in the first movie, he still makes you can still see the impact he has on the characters since he reappears at least once in Spider-Man 2 and again as Spider-Man 3 when Harry Osborn decides to become the quote-unquote new Goblin.
Absolutely. And then moving on from Spider-Man a little bit, we also can't forget to mention the failures of Marvel originally. And I don't know who was in charge of making these movies because I don't know how splintered Marvel really was. All I know now is that, Fox is owned by Disney now, so X-Men is technically owned by Disney. But all it was I knew was X-Men had gone to Fox, Spider-Man had gone to Sony, and I'd assumed that everybody else had gone to Disney, but I don't know where they went.
I don't think
for a
everyone
while.
else went to Disney.
Right, probably not right away.
No.
But I know there were several Hulk movies made that were just pitiful from what I remember hearing.
There was an old Captain America movie that I don't really think received very high marks.
Did you never see any of the original Hulk movies?
I remember seeing bits and pieces.
Now, when you get home, Google the Hulk, the original Hulk movies, because the villain, as far as I can remember, is the government wanted a Hulk or someone wanted a Hulk, so they took his DNA and they made like an abomination, and the CGI is just real bad, and it's hilarious.
That's the thing I remember is the CGI just being god awful in those movies because it was still so early.
Yeah. It just, everything about him wasn't too great. It worked if you were 10. Other than that, not a great movie.
Yeah. So, I mean, Marvel's first success really just came around with Iron Man. And other than Spider-Man, but that's not even necessarily Marvel. That was Sony's doing.
Yeah, that was
Sony's doing. Marvel's first real success comes around with Iron Man and then Captain America, and they just kind of snowballed on that. There was this organic following that came with Marvel. They came from nothing essentially. To quote a song that I don't listen to, it started at the bottom, now we hear. They legit started from basically selling off assets to try and survive as a company to actually making really good films and people wishing that they had all their assets still because, oh my God, they're in this point where having all of these assets together would just make these movies so much better. Even to the point now where there was almost probably riots in some places with some people because Spider-Man is not going to be in the Marvel universe anymore.
Oh, I
think they've finally fixed that and worked that out.
They cut a deal with Sony for another Spider-Man movie and continued use for the MCU.
Thank God.
Second Spider-Man with 3 movies, baby. Let's go.
Yes.
We could. Yeah, that's the even sadder thing now. Sony originally bought Spider-Man because that's the only thing they thought they could make money on. The Marvel Cinematic Universe blows up into this amazing thing that nobody could have ever seen coming. And then they release just 2 really horrible Spider-Man movies.
Yes, the Amazing Spider-Man movies with Andrew Garfield.
Okay, let's not discount the fact that Andrew Garfield is a good actor. It's
yes,
just
100%.
He's not great for Hacksaw Ridge, horrible for Spider-Man.
He did not make a good Spider-Man.
Plus, the plot
agree.
Wasn't amazing. I did with Mary Jane dying though. That was
Gwen Stacy.
Gwen Stacy.
Yeah.
I'm smart. With Gwen Stacy dying, I did feel an emotional draw there, and I did feel impacted by that. But overall, the overarching plot.
Didn't Gwen Stacy die in the second movie?
Yes, in the second one.
So,
it followed relatively close in some. It drew a lot of parallels to the original comics, but their execution on some things wasn't very solid. I think actually one of the high points of the second film was this might be controversial to some people. I honestly liked Jamie Foxx's rendition of Electro, and I liked the redesign of Electro because honestly, if you look at the original design of Electro, you cannot tell me that this man in a skin-tight green suit with lightning bolts for a freaking mask is going to make a good superhero movie villain. There had to be a redesign somewhere. And I thought the redesign was really pretty good.
Yeah.
I thought Jamie Foxx did a pretty decent job on that.
And I thought his character was honestly pretty fine. I can't remember where, but I know for a matter of fact there's at least one other movie. There are probably tens of movies where you see this person's like disheveled and then they end up being the villain. They're getting passed over for opportunities and they don't know what's happening. Everything's going wrong for them, and then that's when you see their turnaround and they become something, somewhat of a villain. And it is a plot line used a lot, but I also didn't hate it because I thought he did a great job for that role.
It's a really popular trope, especially among Spider-Man villains, as I notice it. Because Spider-Man's supposed to be this really sympathetic character, that's had this, come from the bottom kind of story.
Friendly neighborhood.
Yeah, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, kind of come from the bottom. I'm a poor boy. And then all of the villains seem to be, well, I went through all these bad things, and this is what I went to this is what happened to me, and this is why I do this.
Relatable hero, relatable villains.
Relatable hero, relatable villains.
With Electro in The Amazing Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 to be specific, we see that with Venom in general.
And to call back all the way to the new Joker, I think that's what makes this a great movie from DC. Is they portray him in a way that is relatable, and you end up feeling, coming out of the theater, a lot of people have said, like I see it on Twitter, I see people talking about it, that he's not actually a villain out of this movie, is that it makes you think that it's all society and someone else's fault, and that you sympathize with the villain so much. It just is a lot of suspension of disbelief there, and I think that's what makes good movies good movies.
That's actually a perfect way to wrap this all back together into one neat little package. One of the biggest things that Marvel's figured out how to do is to make sympathetic characters that you can relate to. And that was always one of the biggest things DC lacked. How am I supposed to relate to this man whose mustache is being CGI'd off his face?
How am I supposed to relate to this all-powerful man that can shoot laser beams from his eyes?
And maybe that's just maybe this is just the stark difference between the way that Marvel writes their characters versus the way that DC writes their characters. But DC has finally nailed something, and that was making Joker a relatable character where you can sit back and you could say, this guy has a point. This guy has a point. And that's always what makes a good villain, is this guy having a point and understanding kind of where they got there, how they got there, and seeing, wow, this isn't just coming out of left field.
If the villain is not the hero in their own story,
Steppenwolf just hasn't appeared out of nowhere and is throwing things at people.
Well, and the biggest thing too there is not only it shows you their development, it makes you feel like anyone could have developed the same way given the set of circumstances.
Almost introduces fate, so to say, into it in that regard. So I think we've wrapped this up pretty neat and tidy. So we'll leave you off there. That was episode 2 of The Fun Police with Devon Payne and Josh Grote, featuring Nick Bazarek, talking about the current state of superhero movies. Have a good one, folks.